have a good discussion, like comment on Kentucky, and then we jump right into it. Is that how you're thinking about it? Okay.
Good morning. Welcome to Grant County Schools. I've got Rob Stafford with me, and I'm Ron Livingood. This is our TED Talk for our Danielson's model. And so, in reading some of the resources and doing some of the work that we've done, and our experience even in evaluating teachers, we want to kind of summarize this whole supervision model as it applies to our understanding of PGES and kind of give some of our feedback on where we feel like the PGES system will benefit Kentucky, teachers, and maybe some of the things to look at and not abandon some of our common sense understandings of what good teaching is and what districts are going to have to do in the future to really intentionally engage some kind of modality for professional development. I thought before we talked about the PGES that we would kind of take a history of how did we get here in terms of observing teachers or supervising teachers to provide more effective teachers in the classroom. How did we get started with that? So Rob, in reading the book, you've kind of got a pretty good outline of how we got to this. Why don't you kind of tell the audience how in the world we got to our PGES model based on the historical perspective of teacher supervision?
Well, over the last century, we've seen the evaluation model evolve. Early on in the late 1800s, we had a system where visitations to the classrooms provided very little feedback to teachers, but we did see a change from just visiting the schools to bringing teachers together to have professional dialogue and discussion with their colleagues. This gave way around the turn of the century to the scientific model of evaluation and instruction, and that was using a lot of Taylor's work to quantify at least what teachers are doing in the classroom.
An industrial model.
An industrial model, a factory model, an industrial model. And it was very much an input and output method.
Very concrete.
Very concrete.
Yes.
Later on in the 60s and 70s, we see the clinical supervision model that dominated supervision even up to the present time. And that provided a systematic approach to how teachers are evaluated. It was a step-by-step process, but it was misused. Originally, it was developed to create a rich discussion and dialogue among the supervisor and the teacher, but it became an end to itself.
We do that a lot in education.
Yes, we do.
Goldhammer wanted to emphasize the relationship piece between the supervisor and the teacher to strengthen trust and to build that, and it would be contagious in the classroom. And it was interesting how the priority of that was replaced just by the protocol or the process. We're pretty good at that in education.
Following on that clinical supervision model, we have the very popular Madeline Hunter model, and that was what we referred to as mastery teaching. And the teacher was focused on, the supervision was focused on the teacher and what they were doing, and they put it in place of, in the context of a pre-conference and the evaluation or the observation in a post-conference, and this became a very popular model that was followed throughout the United States.
It's kind of measurable. It was broken up into small enough steps that, you could break it down into smaller pieces and have an analysis of what good teacher behavior was because of how it was segmented and broken down into pieces.
Well, and this model from the 80s gave way in the 90s and into the 21st century to more of a reflective model. One of the where teachers were taking into consideration where they were at professionally, trying to address their needs, developmental needs, whether it's a first-year teacher or
to involve them in the process more.
Right.
Yeah.
And the Danielson model is an example of that process. It is one that here in Kentucky that we have modeled after, And it brings us up to Marzano's work in this book as a comparison to the Danielson model. They're very similar, they're very close. In Danielson, she has 4 steps of planning and preparing, classroom environment, instruction, and professional responsibilities. And in Marzano, he has classroom strategies and behaviors, planning, preparing, reflecting on teaching, and collegiality and professional.
Everybody has to have their own language.
Very closely aligned. So that really sets the stage and lays the groundwork for how where we're at now with this system.
So I'm taking from your comments, probably the most fundamental change, as we saw with Madeline Hunter, the emphasis was on what the teacher did. We've kind of seen a paradigm shift with Danielson model, and more so with Marzano's value added, with an emphasis on students. What are students doing? And probably one of the things that we picked up in the PGES training is that it's all about student learning. Now, from a philosophical perspective, you know, even as building principles, that's probably where we were even with the Madeline Hunter model. I think that we were trying to get the message across to teachers even years ago. You know, you might be doing all these things effectively, but if the kids aren't learning, we're going to have to look at something else. So a big paradigm shift has been from monitoring and watching what the teachers do and how the teachers perform. The real shift has happened now. What are students doing? How are students performing? So I think we've really arrived in education to a format where we're looking more at student and how do you facilitate certain student behaviors that show and indicate, you know, learning, our kids learning.
So how does Marzano's work impact PGES in Kentucky today?
I think, you know, the first thing it does is it really establishes clear goals for what students need to be doing and how students need to be performing, and it really has put an emphasis on student progress. And I think then you just have to start looking at tools. How do you measure this progress? What is it that students are doing that show progress? Districts have done about everything. Probably the measured academic progress is one of the biggest tools that we use. But I think just establishing clear targets for what students need to be doing in a calendar year. Of course, we measure that by days. And I'm always skeptical of what does a year's student growth look like by student. That always kind of worries me. But I think that figuring out how to get students to interact with new knowledge and then deepen their understanding about existing knowledge and connecting it to new knowledge has been something that we have to be really more intentional about. But I think one of the things that we should pull from Marzano work and Danielson work is that relationship piece. It's something that it's alluded to, and I think from my experience, and probably from your experience, and I think it's a good topic to park on just for a little while, there are a lot of measurable dynamics involved in the professional growth and effectiveness system, and we've really broken it down into smaller pieces, and we've really been intensive in regards to looking at rubrics about what is exemplary, what is developing. And I think probably the piece that merits a little bit more attention is that relationship piece.
Do you think Marzano was strong on the relationship piece in his work?
I don't think Marzano was as strong intentionally on the relationship piece. I think that if you look at the experienced teacher and if you look at the heart of education, we realize that there is more to this culture for learning than meets the eye. And I think that in school districts and in schools, it's difficult that's not a concrete thing that you can put your hands on, but when you have developed the relationship piece, and that relationship piece is teacher to teacher, student to student, student to teacher, teacher to community, teacher to parent, that whole relationship piece has got to be really developed where people are inviting to themselves, and I don't think that everybody ought to be just touchy-feely and loving everybody all the time in the absence of rich learning. But I think the purpose of a strong relationship between teachers and students and the community brings relevance and meaning to learning, and it provides a context. And I think that that might be the piece that school districts, when they take all the concrete information from professional growth and effectiveness system, one of the philosophical premises that really, I believe, need to be in place is the learning culture. What is the culture of learning, and how do relationships, the human relationships of those individuals in a school district, how do they lead to developing this culture through really convincing kids that you really like them and you really are concerned about whether or not they're successful in whatever endeavor they have, and knowing your kids so well that you're able to figure out what their strength is and grow their strength and maybe minimize some of the weaknesses that they have.
What do you think would be our overall learning from this? What do you think from Marzano's work, from the work that we're doing in PGES? What can school districts take from this?
I think, Rob, you and I have talked well enough now. I think that districts are now going to have have a real intentional professional development plan. And it can't be like the plan we used to develop when we first got professional development money, when it really didn't, it was kind of a compliance model. We did that because we had resources, but I think that a professional development plan for school districts in the future is going to have a deeply philosophical vision and mission that is embedded in a strong knowledge base for what good teaching looks like. I think that school districts are going to have to articulate that. I think they're going to have to be able to communicate that in terms of what good teaching is, and I think that it's going to have to be established in such a scenario by which you have a kind of a global expectation for good teaching, but it is also individualized, where you are able to focus in on individual teacher strengths and develop them for a goal that might be, you can have a goal for where good teaching is, but you've got to figure out paths of teacher development whereby school districts can intentionally develop all teachers on that path to maybe that one end. And I think that you're going to see an increased time whereby teachers talk to other teachers about this articulated knowledge base of good teaching. And I think that teachers are going to have to be more involved in their own development as educators, in the next 5 years. And I think districts are going to have to kind of facilitate that.
And we're going to have to find ways to recognize good teaching
I think
and
so.
expertise and reward it.
I think so. More so now, I think, than ever before. One of the things that, we're trying to do in Grant County, and I think that other districts have already kind of picked up on that, is to figure out, what model teaching looks like, and then recognize that, and then have your own professional development within your district where you're sending your own people to your own people to see what excellence looks like. Because I think the days of going to another district or another state and finding out what quality looks like and what quality is, those days are going to have to give way to expertise within our own counties and our own districts. And I have a rural system, you have a rural system, and I think that we have expertise within our districts. I think we've got to really verbalize that. We need to acknowledge that, then we need to market that and provide it as an opportunity for other people to grow in life.
Good talking to
We
you, Bob.
learned a lot about professional growth and effectiveness, and we appreciate your all's time as you watched our TED Talk here, and we want to thank Linda, my executive assistant there, for holding that iPad and recording this session for us. Thanks. Have a good day.